heard from the other session, there's many bureaucracies and regulatory agencies that many communities have to go through for some of these complicated sites. Now, infield brownfields reuse has just become really more complex over the last few years. More recently, local governments have lost staff, and nonprofits or partnerships of different stakeholders are taking on the mantle of equitable and sustainable reuse. These goals are noble and just, yet each step of the way there's a labyrinth of rules and a series of convenings, discussions, and planning. And so we just want to give our audience and our discussants an opportunity to discuss what the latest practices are to get through these challenges and toward just transition. Let's see, do we have all our speakers? Cynthia, there, Cynthia, Ali, Bahram, Andrina. And so I'm going to introduce Andrina Dominguez, who will be moderating this, this great panel. They will all introduce themselves because I cannot do them justice. They're a great panel, so thank you. Andrina?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ignacio. I'm really happy to be here, and in particular, excited to talk about this topic because it's very near and dear to my heart. Now, given the audience, I think a lot of you will be familiar with the neighborhood in Santa Rosa known as Roseland. It is a recently incorporated neighborhood, and it's where my parents and my 3 younger siblings all live, work, and play. And it wasn't until my now girlfriend gave a presentation in grad school that I learned about the history of petroleum and hazardous waste contamination that has been present in that area for decades. And so when I think about that community, I think about it as a beautiful and diverse and engaged group of people. And I really think that Roseland exemplifies the type of revitalization we're all here to talk about. Now, before we dive into the topic, I'd love to introduce our panelists. Today, we have Bahram Fazeli, who is the Director of Research and Policy from Communities for Better Environment. We have Cynthia Guzman, a principal with Estolano Advisors, and Ali Frazzini, the Sustainability Policy Advisor with the LA County Sustainability Office. We've got a lot of great examples of success stories and local wins, but before we dive into that, I'd like to kind of set the scene and talk about what's the challenge here. We heard a lot this morning from the technical perspective about challenges with sites, challenges with the different agency reviews, and I'd like to pivot to talk more about the political challenges, the engagement challenges, and most importantly, the capacity challenges when we think about the entities, the cities, and the communities who are actually living and working in these areas. And so thinking about this topic and thinking about the just transition, what do you all see as these sort of linked challenges when we think about, 1, achieving a just transition, and 2, having a cleaner environment for our communities? Open it up to whoever wants to start. Maybe we can start with a softball. What does just transition mean to you all?
Thank you. So, there's sort of a broad definition of just transition where we are essentially talking about creating community-based processes and decision-making processes and end uses that benefits the community and the workers. Mm-hmm. And then there is a more narrower definition of just transition where we are specifically focused on ending our reliance on fossil fuel and transforming those uses into essentially also what benefits the workers and the community. So obviously there's a lot of challenges, and especially when it comes to fossil fuels and drilling, refineries, natural gas, and other uses. So there's a need for leadership and vision on the part of the decision makers. There's a need for, obviously, community involvement. And there is a need to create a blueprint, a roadmap, to get us from point A to point B. And point B is, when it comes to fossil fuels, is we want to end, we want to create a sort of environment, a community, a state, a county, a city that does not really have any fossil fuel operations, and that those spaces are transformed into community beneficial spaces with good paying, good green jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's the vision for the just transition.
Right. And when we're looking at these types of reuse and revitalization projects, be curious to hear, Ali, from the agency perspective, what are the silos and roadblocks you see in terms of capacity?
There are so many. I think one of the most visible challenges is that there are lots of different regulatory agencies that might need to be involved in any given process or project. And from what I have learned so far working on this issue, it seems like each project is unique. And so it may not be so easy to create a roadmap of exactly which regulatory agency do you need to reach out to for this specific site. And that's why it's helpful to have resources such as CALRC and organizations that have been doing this work for a long time who kind of know how to navigate it. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that I think makes perfect sense. And Cynthia, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of, when we think about just transition and revitalizing sites, what are some of the roadblocks communities may face?
Yeah, I think just building on what Bahram and Ali just raised, I see a gap, a need in terms of capacity building. Often the folks that are at the table include, public agency reps and consultants such as myself who are paid to participate in a process and get up to speed on technical documents and all that stuff. Community members, other stakeholders, don't receive that same type of support. So really thinking about capacity building from a very holistic perspective, not just support. I'm also financial support. I'm also talking about capacity building in terms of bringing folks up to speed on the very complex regulatory legal framework that underpins all of these different sites, specific sites that were mentioned this morning and earlier in the conference.
Great, thank you. Claire, how are we doing with our slides? Okay. We've heard about the challenges and kind of set the scene of what hurdles there may be at the community and government level. But it's not all bad. We've had some great successes in the county and local communities, and each of our speakers is going to highlight, from their perspective, some great wins that we've seen. And so once we, there we go. So Bahram, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that, these are, from our perspective, from a community-based environmental justice perspective, for communities that have been disproportionately impacted by cumulative sources of pollution, mobile source pollution, stationary source pollution, land, water contamination. These are solvable problems, and it requires investment, and we think the government has the funding. And like Cynthia and Ali mentioned, we creating the right partnerships requires investment and leadership. So these are the things that can be done, have been done before in other examples, and so I can just highlight one of the. So this is we received in 2010, we received an area-wide planning grant from US EPA, and we looked at the 110-acre area in the city of Huntington Park. Now, this is an area, the most of it actually was brownfields and contaminated land. When the heavy industry left in 50s and 60s, union jobs, and then was replaced by the smaller manufacturing operations, So there's like multiple generations of polluting industries. And so they left really a legacy of pollution in this area. And our goal here was to create a community-driven vision, and as Cynthia mentioned, to build the capacity of the community to engage, and also to create an implementation plan, which we did with the help of Cynthia and Estolano group, and CALRC was also our technical advisor, James Rojas from Placid, and many other technical assistants from EPA and others. So folks, be happy. It's on our website at cbecal.org. Just Google brown to green Huntington Park or CBE. So we actually took it's a pretty fascinating story, because this was actually the site that brought CBE to the city of Huntington Park. After the 1994 Northridge earthquake, there was a need for recycling concrete from the failed, sort of the collapsed freeways, the 10 freeways and other freeways. So they brought it to this area for a concrete recycling facility. And for 10 years, the community was fighting to shut down that facility, which was creating huge amounts of pollution for the neighborhood, creating asthma attacks, and so this is while the facility was operating. After the community was successful in shutting down the facility, then obviously we're left with this mountain of concrete, which people called La Montaña, on Cottage Street in Huntington Park. And then it was the idea was that how do we get rid of this? How do we create a beautiful space? This is actually across the street from where people live. So when we started this process throughout the Brownfield, the area-wide planning process, which brought us actually to Southeast LA and to Huntington Park, and that's where our headquarters is right now at CBE. We received this area-wide planning to look at different brownfield spaces within this 110 acres and create a community-driven vision and engage with the city of Huntington Park and engage with DTSC. I think we obviously it was very important to have technical support from Estolano and Cynthia and others, so we understand what is really feasible, because there's the community vision. And then there's what is actually feasible. So sort of trying to find the overlapping spaces between those two, and also engaging the community in the process. When we first took the community for a tour of this 110-acre area, our residents of Huntington Park and members, they said, no, this is actually not part of Huntington Park. This is actually part of the neighboring city of Vernon. They could not believe that you could have acres, tens of acres of abandoned and brownfield and contaminated land, that it looked like, terrible area. They did not accept that this is part of the city of Huntington Park. So no, actually, this is part of the city of Huntington Park. And then now let's start creating a vision for what do you want in this space. And we have a very thriving youth program. They engage in that process. We created catalytic projects. One of the projects, we called it Rail with Trail, to incentivize the city of Huntington Park and Metro to create what is now called the Rail to River project. And the other catalytic projects are, incentivize revitalization by the city of Huntington Park and others. And so what I want to highlight most in my presentation from a perspective of an equity-based organization is we look at brownfields as wrap-up. We look at brownfields as an opportunity to promote equity. It's an opportunity to promote environmental justice, an opportunity to promote resiliency, an opportunity to promote just transition, creating good-paying jobs for the community and the workers, to create enduring collaborations and health and climate solutions and replicable models. So, we always look at everything as an opportunity to promote equity, whether it's climate solutions. Right now, as we speak, there is a scoping plan hearings going on in Sacramento. So we are saying that addressing climate solutions, global climate solutions, is an opportunity to promote equity. So if you look at everything from the lens of equity, you will see that actually opens up a lot of opportunities. It will benefit the workers, it will benefit the climate, delivers public health, delivers good paying jobs, creates a lot of local and global solutions. So that is the way we look at actually every problem from the environmental problem. I'm sorry I went over time. Yeah.
Frazzini here. I'm with the county's Chief Sustainability Office. We're a small policy shop in county government, so we don't oversee specific projects or programs, but we provide policy leadership and guidance, including for the various county departments who do oversee projects and programs. And we developed a plan called Our County in 2019 that is an overarching vision of what a sustainable county will mean in the future, and what LA County can look like. And for us, sustainability must include equity, so I very much appreciate Bahram's emphasis on that. And that Our County plan, as well as the Climate Action Plan that is currently in development by the county's Department of Regional Planning, both include a lot of commitments that could benefit from the reuse of brownfields and that would be supported by sort of the reactivation or reuse of those sites. So this slide just shows a smattering of examples from the Our County plan that could potentially take place in brownfield sites. So for example, we have a commitment to do urban heat island mitigation. Some brownfields are paved over, and they're just contributing to the magnification of heat and the problem of extreme heat waves that will only get worse with climate change. And so if we can unpave those or somehow green them to reduce that heat intensification effect, that will be a great use for a brownfield site that brings undoes the injustice of the heat island effect in that community and brings equity. Similarly, we have a commitment around organic waste recycling, and vacant lots could be great spaces for community composting or urban agriculture. How great would it be to transform a vacant lot into a garden that is not only a heat mitigating space but also brings people together, maybe provides food. So in particular, I wanted to highlight the heat mitigation concern. Right now, we're really trying to mobilize a lot of action to support communities in becoming more climate resilient because of the inevitable effects of climate change. Last year, we did a climate vulnerability assessment that really we see as a call to action, showing that heat waves will get worse in the future, and they will disproportionately burden our most disadvantaged communities. So, and then the question of how to transform brownfields for these other types of uses is, of course, hugely important to our just transition work, which has already been brought up this morning, or the board motions relevant to it have been brought up in a previous panel. So as you all may have heard, the County Board of Supervisors has directed that oil extraction become a non-conforming use, be eventually phased out of unincorporated areas, and the city has made a similar commitment. And so we have started bringing together folks like Bahram, who is wonderfully engaged in it, so community advocates, labor, industry, environmental advocates, to talk about how can we do this transition away from oil extraction in a way that is equitable. So the main point I just want to convey with this is that we're really trying to be as collaborative as we possibly can. And one of the key goals is to support community-led visioning of the reuse for those sites. Of course, as I think you've already heard from other folks, some of the big challenges with that are that a lot of those sites are privately owned, and the government doesn't necessarily have great levers to dictate what exactly happens next. And no two processes for sort of navigating the regulatory environment are exactly the same. But we are doing our best to bring transparency to that, to make it more navigable. And we're doing that by working closely with the city. We're actually both contributing funding to this work. And we are creating space for the groups involved to coordinate on advocacy at the state level. And we think that one important thing that government will need to do going forward is plug people, plug communities into the existing community planning processes where decisions about how to rezone or sort of what can be allowed with reuse are being made. Because sometimes your stakeholders who care about a specific site don't realize sort of what is the broader area plan or neighborhood plan that may influence how this site is used. I think that is pretty much wraps up my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Cynthia Guzman. I'm a principal at Estolano Advisors. We're an urban planning and public policy consulting firm based in Los Angeles and do work throughout California and nationally. We were asked to present on an example of a successful collaboration, and really, our firm doesn't do brownfield remediation, technical brownfield remediation directly. We definitely come in at the planning and visioning stage, and not just in the climate resilience space, but also in transportation, economic development, and other factors. So we bring a pretty multidisciplinary approach. I'm an urban planner by training. I also spent 5 years as a board member of the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board. I stepped down at the end of last year, but definitely bring that perspective from an outside consultant that's working with public agencies and community-based organizations, as well as working within an agency and really getting a sense of all of the limitations and all of the challenges that certainly come up with doing the really great work that so many of you in this room do. So we were asked to share an example of a collaboration, but it was very hard to pick just one. So I'll start by just sharing some best practices and lessons learned during my time doing this work, including in partnership with some of the individuals on this panel today. Okay, so lessons learned. All parties need to be clear on their priorities and limitations. In policy development, certainly brownfield development, it's so easy, as I mentioned before, to get lost in the complicated legal, regulatory, and policy framework. We understand that multiple agencies hold different roles. It's really important to start a process with managing expectations and figuring out who does what. I think that really helps set up a partnership for success. And knowing that up front could really help facilitate a process and not needlessly hamper it. Also, agency leadership and priorities change over time. That's a hard one. As practitioners, we need to be realistic about this fact, but also not lose the eye on the ball. What an organization can do and what they can't do, and how they're the really important thing to focus on here is what agencies can do, and really try to find some opportunities for alignment and collaboration. Another thing that I think is a common thread in this panel has been multi-sector partnerships. Certainly it was really important element to the success of the Brown to Green plan, as well as our county and the work that the Chief Sustainability Office is doing. Though they're time intensive, they're incredibly valuable. We've often advised public sector clients who often want to opt for a smaller table in hopes of expediting a process, and that can often lead to more delays down the road. So the bigger table that you build at the beginning could really help set things up for success. And then going back to my initial point during the Q&A around supporting community members and organizations in engaging meaningfully in processes. Stakeholders need to be supported to participate. It means money, but it also goes beyond that. It goes into capacity building in order for folks to know how to navigate the work that you all do, and in order to make sure that they come from a place of information and can kind of co-create the best outcome on a given project. So an approach that has been giving me hope these days are the substantial yet increasingly incremental efforts that public agencies, philanthropy, and others have been doing to help raise the capacity of community-based organizations. So I'll just talk about two really quickly. One has been some of the work that I've been seeing coming out of the Water Foundation. Philanthropy has a really important role in supporting community organizations and community processes like brownfield remediation, and we shouldn't ignore that. The Water Foundation developed a Water Leaders program. It was focused on training community-based appointees to the Watershed Area Steering Committees, which was a governing framework that was put forth with the passage of the Safe Clean Water program here in LA County. These committees were comprised of community members and also agency representatives. Some of them came with the technical backing and wherewithal in order to engage with these complicated policy documents, others less so. And Water Leaders was there to help fill that role. And so some of the trainings that they deployed in order to support these leaders included general strategies for being an effective board member, trainings on technical documents and topics that may be helpful for their roles, and then other things like learning about things like the Brown Act and ex parte and those sorts of governance requirements that they were bound by, as well as trying to figure out some ways in order to get their priorities heard and considered in the conversations at the Watershed Area Steering Committee. So that's an example, a successful example of collaboration. Another thing, I know I got the wrap up. Another thing that I want to talk about is a new program that's coming out of the Strategic Growth Council. I think there's SGC folks in the room, but I'll just talk about this quickly. The Regional Climate Collaboratives program, that's a multi-sector, it's a program that's focused on funding multi-sector partnerships in the climate resilience space. So that's money for social infrastructure, not for projects, though I know that's important too. But my spiel is all about emphasizing the importance of building social infrastructure and capacity for community groups and all folks to come together to articulate common goals and a path forward. So that's a resource that's available. Our firm's delivering the technical assistance along with a few other organizations. So that's funding that's available that some of the folks that you work with in your region might want to take advantage of. I'll stop now. Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. Want to give some time for Q&A, so we'll have a quick discussion here, but thinking about this nexus, sort of what Cynthia left her last slide on, of just transition, of engagement, of climate action. You know, we heard about this example in Anaheim where the project was delayed 10 years, right? How do we avoid those kinds of setbacks, especially when it comes to things like bringing people along with the process?
Well, I think it comes down to setting very clear expectations. Some of them may not be popular to begin with, but we know brownfield remediation takes time. And I think just setting those expectations very clearly to start, understanding the abilities and limitations of the agencies at the table. I just heard an anecdote earlier today, just talking to folks, and then also just in my experience as doing this work of where folks don't know what DTSC does versus what EPA does versus what the regional board does. So there's a lot of this going on, at least externally. And I think that creates a lot of confusion, and sort of breaking that down and just setting forth roles really, really clearly can help facilitate. It won't propel you to success, but at least common understanding helps.
Thank you. I appreciate that, definitely. I just want to add that from also in addition to everything that Cynthia said, that this is a problem, this is a pollution legacy that EJ communities, environmental justice communities, have been stuck with. So to solve this requires investment. Now, the people who have most of the funding is the government. Right now we have a massive surplus. We're in the process of finding out what to do with the surplus in the state. So it does require leadership, vision, and with just the small grant that we got from US EPA, we were able to create a lot of engagement on the part of the community, and we were able to identify catalytic projects. And that was a relatively small grant. So it is not just to engage the community, but it's also to create the inspiration for the local governments. Many of the small cities, for example, in Southeast LA, don't have the resources to create these big projects. So it does really, in addition to everything else, it does come down to can we push our decision makers to become more visionary and create more investments? Now, we do need to hold polluters accountable. So we do believe in polluters pay and polluters being held accountable. So there's a lot of legislative fixes that needs to be made, and there are a lot of bottlenecks in revitalization and redevelopment. Now, I just want to share from our perspective that we don't think CEQA is one of them. We don't think getting rid of environmental assessment or proper environmental assessment to help rebuild and revitalize disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities is the real bottleneck for why these things are not happening. So I just want to highlight that, and I want to share that because I know that some people are saying that CEQA is the problem. From our perspective, CEQA is not the problem. There are many other problems there and many other fixes, and we are part of California Environmental Justice Alliance. We have put out a green zone sort of a document that identifies some of those approaches. And there are many success stories that can be replicated, like similar to what Cynthia highlighted. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I want to build on what Cynthia was saying earlier about needing to build social infrastructure, and I think you offered a number of examples of the types of resources that can support community groups. I would add that one limitation I often see on the governmental side of things is departments saying we don't have funding for engagement. And that's just appalling. I mean, you have to, if there isn't funding for engagement and you're just sort of sticking your existing staff, for a 2-hour nightly meeting where, only your most resourced and dedicated, sort of already knowledgeable citizens might be showing up, you're not truly hearing from the community or working with the community. And so government needs to do more to actually make finances available for that engagement.
Great, thank you. I have loads more questions, but I want to make sure that the audience has a chance. So if you have a question, please feel free to walk up to the microphone. We have about 6 minutes or so, so I'd love to, yes, please.
Thank you for the panel. I agree with Bahram with the CEQA. I'm a part of the developer world, but that's kind of our first line of defense for our communities. I think one thing as we're thinking about capacity building, and I was in a workshop yesterday with Place It, is building the capacity of our communities to understand the language and the tools that government agencies functions in so that they could also be their own advocates. So that's something. And that kind of goes back to the resident and community engagement. Oftentimes we're completing these grants and these NOFAs and RFP, and I'm on the side that we need to not incentivize community engagement, but we need to be respectful of our communities and their time and their energy and pay them, right? And that's a big thing. I cannot tell, in one community right now that we're working on, we have 350 single female-headed households, right, working multiple jobs. The last thing they want to do is come to a community meeting at 6 p.m. Yes, I'm offering dinner, yes, I'm doing all those things, but really paying and respecting their time. If we're really gonna say we're gonna come along with community, we really have to put the resources, financial resources, there. So I love the idea of collaborating and really looking innovatively, but a lot of these RFPs will cap you at like $2,000 for like incentivizing, and then on our end, we have to be really resourceful, like, so who's gonna pay out the gift cards? And we have to be really strategic about that, instead of just being transparent and straightforward and say, I wanna hire community members, I wanna pay the community members, because I think that's where the real work is gonna start, when we start respecting our community members. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone on the panel want to add on to that, or maybe talk about an example on a project you had? I know, Allie, there was quite a bit of engagement on some of the county sustainability planning.
Yeah, absolutely. We, with the development of the Our County Sustainability Plan, which I mentioned, and it's on the, I think, on the slide, we had funding set aside for multiple types of engagement. I think it's important to acknowledge that, you shouldn't just be doing public workshops or just be doing focus groups. You know, as many methods as you can use, the more venues you create to work with people, to, you know, hear from people, sort of the more complete your, you know, a collective community's understanding will be of all of the sides of an issue and how to bring equity to it. And so that includes, you know, funding for community organizations who work directly with people, and when you need to hear directly from community members, funding for those community members. So very much appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
So EPA and DTSC have these grants, and so Bahram, you mentioned the area-wide planning grant, which I think was like $150,000. So in order to spread that kind of model just in LA County alone, I mean, how many CBEs would you need? I mean, you got the county, you got the great framework, but you have to spread that framework to under-capacity communities. You have a good working relationship with the City of Huntington Park, but you got all these other LA cities. How do you foresee this spreading?
Yeah, I mean, we organize in Southeast LA region, which has a number of cities, including the City of Huntington Park, and we also organize in the city of LA, in the harbor area, in the Wilmington, which has the largest concentration of refining in the West Coast, the largest concentration of oil extraction in the city of LA. But there is a need to, we need capacity, and we are probably, we have a lot of capacity compared to maybe other smaller community-based organizations, but even we are stretched thin, just meeting the demands of our, resources. So there's many amazing and community-based organizations throughout the LA region. And there is a great need for capacity to create community engagement and create those partnerships that it was in one of the slides, and also create the inspiration. I mean, it's not just to put. Oh, fire alarm.
We cannot seem to catch a technological break. Well, thank you to our panelists so much. Please give them a big round of applause for their inspirational words, and thank you all so much for your time.